Welcome to Gasser Camp. Today I'm going to be showing you how to tie my favorite kind of brush fly. It's taken me a while to find a way to tie them that I like. This way I found they swim pretty stably. It uses a lot of natural materials, minimizes the synthetics, so they have very nice movement typically, and you really can play around with mixing the colors. So today I'm doing one that works quite nicely in Cameroon. It's a very natural kind of color. I think it'll work great in the salt as well. Somewhere like Tanzania, I tied one in Merino Trogon colors. So yeah, that was black, olive and red. That was a killer on the Manera in particular. So yeah, really you can go wild with the colors of it. The materials I'm using for this are saddle hackles, bucktail, bit of flash, marabou and SF materials. Then the eyes are just stick-on eyes from China.
China.
The hook, if you're going for tigerfish in particular, that becomes quite important. So the hook I'm using today is a 3.0 TMCO 600 SP. Also really like the Gamakatsu SC15. I think it's a tarpon hook as well. So yeah, if you're going more for the salt, if tigers aren't what you're tying for, then Gamakatsu SL12 or the Eric's equivalent. Okay, so when I'm working with nano silk, I tend to put a little bit of super glue onto the shank before I start tying. Just because there's no wax on the thread, it likes to slip around, and especially when tying things that you might be throwing for toothy fish like tigers, it's a good idea to use more super glue rather than less. Also creates a really nice base so that later on materials will not slip around. I'm going to start with the tan bucktail. I'm taking a clump from about 2/3 of the way down the bucktail just so that it has a little bit of flair to it. Going to use the full length. There you can see it's flared quite nicely. Then I'm going to take 2 or 3 tan hackles. Going 3 today. Here we go. One on top. And then one either side. And I'm tying them with the concave side facing out. Right, so they're just being held in place at the moment with 1 or 2 thread wraps. I haven't tightened it down hard yet. Now I'm going to add 3 olive feathers. Once again, 1 on top, 1 either side, concave side facing outwards. Just manipulate the feathers a little bit since they're not tied down really hard at this stage. Get them roughly to the position you want them, and then you can really put some pressure on to keep them all in place. I'm going to add a little bit of flash. I don't usually add too much. If I'm fishing for tigers, I'll add a little bit more. If I'm fishing for saltwater fish, usually a little bit less. Today I'm using some holographic flash. It's a mix of colors, but it's mostly sort of gold and copper. Your choice what you want. I'm going to do 3 strands either side of the tail. Wrap the thread forward to just in front of this lump formed by the butts of the hackles. Now I'm going to take some olive bucktail, I'll choose a fairly short fibered bucktail, and I'm going to take the hairs from the bottom of the tail, so it'll flare quite a bit. Tie it in 2 or 3 gentle wraps, and then just manipulate it so that it goes most of the way around the hook shank. Doesn't have to go all the way, but you certainly want it at least covering the top and sides. As you can see, as soon as I cinch down the thread, it flared very nicely. This will begin to create a little bit of bulk to the fly. Wind your thread forward a little bit. You're now about 2/3 of the way up the hook shank. And I'm going to take another clump of bucktail here. In this case I'm going to use the darker stuff from the middle of the olive bucktail, also down near the base so that it can flare a little bit. And also fairly short stuff. The stuff in the center of the bucktail tends to be a bit shorter anyway. Now it's going to be similar to the last clump of bucktail, only I'm going to tie it in facing forwards. Manipulate it so that it goes around the hook shank. Now hold these butts and let it flare, and you're going to want to wrap backwards a little bit just to create a little bit of a thread base here. We're going to bullet tie this. Going to now push this backwards. Gentle wrap, and then really pull it hard. You can see that has flared quite a lot more than the previous clump of bucktail, and that's now also beginning to create a bit of the profile of the body of our fly. It also creates a little bit of structure that will help to support the marabou that I'm going to put in front of this. So In this case I'm going to use some tan marabou here, turkey marabou. I'm going to use my budget Petitjean tool. And I'll split thread some marabou here. Now gently tease it with some Velcro, just because when you split thread anything it likes to tangle a little bit. If you want to make a good brush while split threading, it's worth just taking your time to brush it a lot. Do it slowly, do it carefully, try to avoid any major tangling, and your results will be way better. Now I'm going to brush it back as I wrap it with the Velcro. Okay, you can really start to see the profile of the fly taking shape. Now I call this thing a brushy, but I'm not actually going to make a brush for the head. I'm going to use clumps of SF fiber. In this case it is the bleeding perch color. It's a really nice natural olive color. Golden olive, I guess. Alright, I'm going to take a full length of the SF, fold it in half, fold it in half again. You can see this first clump isn't particularly dense. I'm going to just sort of tease out the ends a little bit, just so that you don't have any horrible straight lines in the fly. I'm going to tie this first clump in roughly halfway down the clump, and very similar to the bucktail, I'm going to try and spread it around the hook shank. Push it backwards. And tie down, bullet tying. This first one you can bullet tie, nice and easy. Then I'm going to move right to the front of the hook here. And this SF will be a slightly thicker clump. I'm going to do exactly the same thing as before, where I fold it in half and half again. And once again, I'm going to just tease out some of the ends to taper it slightly. Okay. Now this clump I am going to tie in with the majority of it facing forward. So you have about 1/3 of it tied in backwards and 2/3 of the length tied in forwards. Once again, I'm going to try and spread this as evenly around the hook shank as possible. This one is a little bit more important to get even. Tie it down hard with the thread moving forward so it's right to the hook eye here. I'm going to push this backwards. Get my thread forward. This one I'm not going to bullet tie. This one I am building up a little bit of thread. Damming up thread. Makes a nice small head. And there we go. Now, because ain't nobody got time for a whip finish, and whip finishes are crap anyway, I'm going to put a bunch of super glue on the thread here. And wrap a few times. And trim the thread. Now, some people don't like eyes on their flies, some people do. I'm personally a fan. Just think it makes them look sexy. You don't have to put stick-on eyes on this thing. I'm going to today, using 6mm silver stick-on eyes. Now, quite often they don't stick nicely, and that is usually due to the whatever adhesive they use to stick the eyes to the sheet that they come on. So I like to scratch any of that gummy stuff off with my thumbnail. What you can also do is soak them in isopropyl alcohol for 5 minutes and then gently rub them with a rag. You don't want to soak them too long because it actually starts to take the foil off the back of the eye and that kind of thing. But yeah, 5 minutes soak and then rub them with a rag, and you usually get rid of all of that adhesive, and they will then stick much better. I stick them on with super glue. Careful not to get super glue on your fingers. Just in the center of the eye, leave a little bit of a space around the edge, because it is going to squeeze out a bit too, and as soon as it touches your fingers, things just stuff up. This can be the most frustrating part of tying baitfish. Going to want to use, if you're using super glue, you're going to want to use quite a lot of pressure for a fair amount of time, just to make sure it's stuck properly before you try to take your finger away. That's one. And two. And there you go. You'll see with eyes stuck on with super glue, it tends to give the fish or the bait fish, a slightly 2D shape, which actually works really well. It tends to swim very stably. I know that brush flies in particular have a bit of a habit of turning sideways when you strip them fast. Haven't really had an issue with these, as long as you are careful to get the amount of SF on either side of the hook shank fairly even. It should swim really straight. Also, because the ratio of natural materials to SF in this fly is actually quite small. I mean, I only used the front quarter or front third of the shank to put the SF on. You have a really nice action when you strip it. Natural materials just always will move better than synthetics. So yeah, this is the way that I tie my brushies these days.